Good afternoon, everyone. I, Clarice Medrano, together with my groupmates John Kenneth Metrillo, Rowelyn Pasha, Zaira K. Ramirez, and Renier Ras will discuss the Module 9, the Philippine Financial Reporting Standard or the PFRS 16, the Accounting for Leases. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy as we go along to the discussion. For the introduction, this module discusses the accounting for leases, its features, recognition, measurement, presentation, and disclosure in the financial statements. It also includes lease accounting, sales, and lease book. For the objectives, for the learning objectives, so ano nga ba yung una? First, define and recognize lease accounting. Second one is to discuss the principles of recognition, measurement, presentation, and disclosure of leases. The third one is to differentiate operating lease and financial lease. And last is to explain sales and leaseback concept. So, una po, let us define what is lease. So, ano nga ba yung lease? Siya ba yung nangungupahan ka? In layman's term po, opo, siya po yung nangungupahan. Katulad ng mga nakikita nating signages, signboards na nakalagay na for lease, siya po yung nangungupahan. But in accounting term, mas malalim yung kahulugan niya. So, dito po, i-define po natin under the Appendix A of International Financial Reporting Standard 16, a lease is defined as a contract that conveys the right to use the underlying asset for a period of time and in exchange for consideration. So, una po, himayin po natin. Lease is defined as a contract or part of the contract. So, meron tayong sa lease, meron tayong dalawang contract. The contract of lease and the second one is the subleasing. So, yung subleasing, for example, is nag-rent ka ng may two-story building and nirent mo yung second floor and half of it or hinati mo yung second floor at pinarenta mo rin sa iba. So, ang meaning, yung subleasing is nag-rent ka pero paparenta mo din sa iba. Yun yung subleasing. So, yung napag-usapan ng parties na involved, siya yung part ng contract. Nakalagay siya sa contract. And automatic kapag meron tayong contract, meron tayong involved na parties. So, yung parties na yun is si lessee and si lessor. So, si lessor, siya yung may-ari, siya yung nagpaparenta ng property. And while si lessee naman, siya naman yung nagre-rent or nagli-lease. The right to use the underlying asset for a period of time and in exchange for consideration. So, yung the right to use of the underlying asset, syempre, si lessor, bibigyan niya ng karapatan si lessee na gamitin yung property. Yun yung the right to use. In a period of time, syempre, meron tayong lease term. Yun yung kung kailan magsisimula at kung hanggang kailan mo lang i-release yung property. Nandoon yun sa period of time. And in exchange for consideration naman is, for example, syempre nag-rent ka. Hindi naman pwedeng hindi mo siya babayaran. So, yung ibabayad mo na cash, yung napag-usapan nyo, within the contract, siya yung in exchange for consideration. Kasi kapag hindi mo siya binayaran, hindi yun masasabi na contract. Hindi yun masasabi na part ng contract, hindi siya lease. Para siyang donation, ganon, kasi hindi mo binayadan. Pinagamit lang sa'yo, hindi mo binayadan. While dun naman sa underlying asset, yung underlying asset, siya yung, for example, the building, the land, siya yung property na ipapagamit ni lessor kay lessee. And yun yung magiging subject ng lease. Appendix B9 provides that to be leased, the contract must convey the right to control of the identified asset explicitly or implicitly. So, yung the right to control, parang kagaya din to ng the right to use. Binibigyan ka ni lessor ng karapatan to control yung property or yung asset. For example is, umupa ako nung yun pa rin, yung two-story building, inupahan ko yung second floor, and hinati ko siya into dalawa kasi masyado siya malaki. So, yung other part, pinaupahan ko siya, pero alam naman ni lessor. Yun yung the right to control. Meron akong control kung anong gagawin ko sa asset, kung papaupahan ko ba siya, isasublease ko siya, or gagamitin ko siya, paano ko siya gagamitin. Meron akong right to control. Sa identified asset, it's either explicitly or implicitly. So, explicitly siya, specified in the contract, nakalagay lahat sa contract. Yung terms, yung interest, yung responsibilities ng lessee kay lessor, at ni lessor kay lessee, nakalagay siya sa contract. While yung implicitly naman, specified when made available to the customer. So, for example is, yung first floor, yung specified na floor. Yung first floor available na siya, so pwede na siyang upahan. Yun yung implicitly. So, normally naman, yung ginagamit is explicitly kasi dapat nakalagay lahat sa contract. Part lahat ng contract. Yung term, yung interest, yung babayaran, yung responsibilities of both parties, and yung penalties kapag hindi nabayaran, at lahat nakalagay. So, ayun, remember lang na ang lease is a contract or part of a contract, binibigyan ng right to use ni lessor si lessee, and as well as the right to control. So, doon naman tayo sa right to control the use of an asset. So, as what I've said earlier, binibigyan si lessee ng karapatan to control the asset. So, the customer has the right to dalawa. Una is exclusive use. So, ano yun? Meaning, ng exclusive is, ikaw lang yung pwedeng gumamit. Unless, ipasublease mo siya sa iba. And of course, with the permission of the lessor. So, it obtains substantially all the economic benefits from the use of assets. So, for example, ako ipasublease ko man yung sa second floor ng 2-story building, papasublease ko siya, and I will obtain all the economic benefits na mababayad sa akin. Ganon. And what if naman kapag hindi ko siya pinagkakitaan directly? So, pwede ko siyang gawing office. Ganon. Kasi 'di ba, hindi naman magfa-function na isang business kung wala kang office. Wala kang pinagagawa ng operation, ganon, ng production. Hindi siya magpa-function. So, I will obtain all the economic benefits from the use of that asset, of that office na inilis ko kay lessor. Almost all the economic benefits. So, on the other hand naman, yung direct use of the identified asset, directly na ginagamit yung asset. Sabi nga dito is, directly kung siya ba ay office, kung gagawin ba siyang for operation, for office. So, yun, merong right to control the use of asset directly. Directly yung asset na ginamit. So, next is the party to the lease. So, as I've said earlier, yung contract meron siyang two parties. So, siya si lessor at si lessee. So, si lessor, it provides the right to use. Siya yung nagbibigay ng karapatan kay lessee na gamitin yung asset kasi siya yung nagpaparent, siya yung may-ari, siya yung nagpapalis. While on the other hand, kung si lessor, siya yung nagbibigay ng right to use, si lessee naman is obtains the right to use. Nagpo-provide si lessor, si lessee ang nag-obtain. So, meron tayong types ng lease. Meron tayong dalawa. The finance lease and the operating lease. So, elaborate natin siya. Next slide. Okay, so yung unang types of lease natin is the finance lease. So, ang finance lease is a lease that transfers substantially all the risk and rewards incidental to ownership of an underlying asset. So, para siyang rent to own. Once na ma-fulfill mo lahat ng sinasabi sa contract, parang yung term niya kasi is long term. So, para siyang binabayaran mo siya to acquire that property. Long term. And natatransfer yung property sa lessee as pagdaan ng araw. So, dito, sa next slide, malalaman natin kung paano ba talaga mako-consider yung lease as a finance lease. So, under po ng PAS 17 or the Philippine Accounting Standard 17, any of the following situations would normally lead to a lease being classified as a finance lease. So, yung first situation natin na dapat makamit natin para maklasify yung lease na finance lease is the transfer of ownership. So, yung transfer of ownership, the lease transfers ownership of the leased asset to the lessee after the lease term. So, dito, kagaya ng sinabi ko, yung finance lease para siyang rent to own. Normally present to sa mga pag nag-rent ka ng mga sa subdivision, sa houses, yung after ng lease term, pwede mo siyang ma-purchase. Pwede na siyang, yung ownership pwede na mapunta kay lessee. And next one po is the bargain purchase option. So, dito, the lease provides that the lessee has the option to purchase the leased asset at a price sufficiently lower than the fair value of the asset at the date option becomes exercisable. So, dito, pwedeng ma-purchase ni lessee yung asset, yung property, na mas mababa ang presyo. And the next one po is the major part of the economic life. So, in this case, a lease term of at least 75% of the remaining useful life of the leased asset is considered as a major part of the economic life of the leased asset. So, in cases po where the lease term will commence on the last 25% of the asset's useful life, the finance lease method should not be applied. And the last one is substantially all of the fair value of leased asset. So dito naman po sinasabi na yung present value of the minimum lease payment amounts to substantially all the fair value of leased asset at the inception of the lease. So yung inception of the lease means that the date of the lease agreement or commitment, if earlier, or the date of the lease purchased. Aside from the major criteria that I've said earlier po, meron pa tayong other criteria that these other situations that individually or in combination could also be classified the lease as an finance lease. So, first one po is the specialized in nature. So, dito is the leased asset of such specialized in nature that only the lessee can make it, can use it without a major modification. And the next one po is the losses are borne by the lessee. So, yung lessee po yung nagbe-bear ng losses nung sa asset. If the lessee can cancel the lease, the lessor's losses associated with the cancellation are borne or bear by the lessee. Next one is the gain or losses from changes in fair value accrue to the lessee. Dito naman po is yung gains and losses na nagaling dun sa fluctuation ng fair market value is na yung residual nun accrue to the lessee. Si lessee din yung may responsibility nun. And the last one is the extension of lease term at the option of the lease. So ito is the lessee has the ability to continue the lease for secondary period. At the rent is substantially lower than the market rent. So, pagkatapos ng isang lease term, pwedeng mag-extend si lessee. Pwede ulit siya mag-renta pero mas mababa yung market rent. To fully understand po the finance lease or the lease that classified as a finance lease, madidiscuss po siya at matatakil by the further discussions. On the other hand po, yun naman pong operating lease, siya yung for operation lang siya, yung contract for operation lang talaga. And it is a lease that does not transfer substantially all the risk and rewards incidental to the ownership of an underlying asset. So, meaning, yung risk and rewards remains with the lessor. Yung terms niya is for short term lamang. Hindi katulad ng finance lease na rent to own na matatransfer. Dito sa operating lease, for operation lang talaga siya. For example is yung mga nire-rent mo ng mga laptop, ganon, mga operation ng mga commercial buildings. And that concludes my report, and I hope meron po kayong naintindihan. Thank you!
Good afternoon, my name is John Kenneth Metrillo, and mag-sorry na po ako dun sa kung may maririnig mo po kayong mga background noise at saka sa boses ko po kasi medyo masama po yung pakiramdam ko ngayon at may ubot sipon po ako. Kaya po ganun yung boses ko. So yun nga po ulit, good afternoon. So natapos na tayo sa discussion ng lease, sa types of lease and sa criteria para maklasify natin ang lease as a finance lease. So at this point naman, ipapaliwanag ko kung ano ba ang accounting for the finance lease, in which magpo-focus muna tayo sa book of the lessee or sa book nung nangungupahan. Dito mapag-uusapan na rin natin kung ano ba ang measurement ng right of use asset. dito papasok si initial measurement ng right of use asset and the subsequent measurement ng right of use asset. Dito din mapapag-usapan din natin dito yung tungkol sa lease liability, and may two types of measurement din doon, yung initial measurement and the subsequent measurement. Same lang sila ng right of use asset. So yan, pag-usapan na natin si accounting for the finance lease sa book of the lessee. PFRS 16 paragraph 22 provides that at the commencement date, yung a lessee shall recognize a right to use asset and a lease liability. So this paragraph 22 of the IFRS 16 simply means that a lessee or yung nangungupahan is required to initially recognize a right of use asset nung underlying asset over the lease term and a lease liability for the obligation to make payments. So mas bale ganito lang naman yung ibig sabihin doon. Sorry. Yun nga, si lessee or yung nangungupahan is required, dapat re-recognize siya initially noong right of use asset nung para gamitin yung underlying asset over a lease term. So ano ba yung underlying asset? So ang underlying asset na tinutukoy dito is yung asset na inupahan ni lessee. Yun po yung ibig sabihin nun. So, nabanggit ko kanina na yung right of use asset ay na-measure natin initially and subsequently. So, at this point, pag-usapan muna natin yung initial measurement ng right of use asset. So, bago yun, paliwanag muna natin kung ano ba yung right of use asset para mas malinaw. So, a right of use asset is defined as an asset that represents the right of a lessee to use an underlying asset over the lease term in a finance lease. Bale, ibig sabihin lang nito nga, yung right of use asset daw ay yung asset na nagre-represent ng right nung lessee or nung nangungupahan para gamitin yung specific asset o yung specific na nirentahan mo over a lease term. Halimbawa, nirentahan ko itong building ng for 10 years. So yun, yung right of use asset, yun yung magre-represent ng karapatan ko para gamitin itong si building. But yun ay sa loob lang ng 10 years kasi yun lang yung sa lease term na pag-usapan o yung lease term na uupahan ko. So or kumbaga, yun lang yung hanggang doon lang yung period na pag-upa ko doon sa building na yun. So, yun yung ibig sabihin ng right of use asset. Sa slide na to, pag-uusapan natin kung paano ba ang initial measurement ng right of use asset. So, initially, right of use asset is recorded at the cost at the commencement date. But the question sa part na to is, ano ba yung cost or ano-ano yung composition ng cost na kailangang i-record initially. So, dito sinasabi na yung cost daw of right of use asset ay binubuo ng yung una, the present value of lease payments. So, kapag sinabi nating present value, tumutukoy ito sa computed value or computed amount na ibabayad mo sa pag-lease mo kay lessor sa buong lease term. For example is yung pag-rent ko ng building for 10 years. So yung computed na ibabayad ko or yung computed na ibabayad ko kay lessor sa buong 10 years, yun yung ilalagay ko sa present value. So, yung next is yung lease payments made to lessor, such as lease bonus, less any lease incentive received. So, dito may mga babayadan naman talaga ang lessee kay lessor na hindi pa kasama doon sa present value ng lease payments. So, ang isang example nga nito ay yung sa lease bonus. Ang lease bonus is yung binabayad or ibabayad ni lessee kay lessor incidental doon sa pagre-rent nun sa asset. So, dito sa lease bonus, i-deduct yung lease incentives na ibibigay ni lessor kay lessee. So, halimbawa, pinayagan ka ni lessor na wag nang magbayad ng first 3 months sa pag-rent dun. Halimbawa, dun sa underrent kong building, sinabi ni lessor na wag ko na daw bayadan yung first 3 months nun. So, ang gagawin ko dun is ileles ko siya dun sa lease bonus. So, halimbawa naman is bayad na pala ako dun. Ang mangyayari dun is ere-refund siya sa akin ni lessor. Yun. Tandaan lang natin na yung lease bonus is gagamitin lang kapag nagko-compute tayo for the initial measurement ng right of use asset at hindi ito kasali sa pagre-record or sa pag-compute ng lease liability. So, pangatlo naman yung initial direct cost incurred by the lessee. So, basically, it talks about the cost directly related dun sa nirerentahan. Kumbaga, 'di ba, hindi naman pwede na hindi ka gagastos kapag rerenta or uupa ka. So, yun, kasali din yun sa initial measurement ng right of use asset or doon sa cost na required doon. So, yung last na dito ay yung estimate of cost of dismantling and restoring the underlying asset for which the lessee has a present obligation. So, dito naman yung cost is halimbawa, may inalis ka, may dinagdag ka, at may binago ka dun sa asset na inuupahan mo. So, isasama mo yung cost na incurred mo dun at i-record mo siya initially sa right of use asset. Bali, yun yung mga kasama sa i-record mo initially na cost sa right of use asset. Kung kanina, pinag-usapan natin kung ano ba yung kasama sa initial measurement ng right of use assets at kung ano ba yung cost or yung mga nagko-comprise sa cost na i-record sa initial measurement. Dito naman, pag-usapan naman natin kung alin ba yung mga hindi kasama sa measurement ng right of use asset. Or, kumbaga, para iwas dito pag-usapan natin or para malaman kung kasama ba or hindi, basta mag-fall dun sa apat na nabanggit ko kanina. So, yun, di kasama siya sa cost. So, kapag naman hindi siya nag-fall dun, di hindi siya kasama sa i-record or hindi siya capitalizable. So, yun dito, ano-ano nga ba yung mga hindi capitalizable at hindi dapat isama sa initial measurement ng right of use asset. So, yung una ay yung leasehold improvements. So, yun. Alam naman natin na ang leasehold improvement is part ng PPE. At alam naman natin kapag part siya ng PPE, maliban sa land, you have to depreciate it. So, ang mangyayari dito, separate yung recording nito at hindi siya part ng recording ng right of use asset. At yung next naman is yung security deposit. So, ang security deposit is asset that is refundable to lessee. So, yun. Security deposit, ibig sabihin nito, ito yung mga asset na refundable nga or mababawi mo pa. 'Di ba? Simple example is kapag 'di ba may time na bumibili tayo sa tindahan ng soft drinks, 'di ba? Bukod dun sa mismong ibabayad natin para sa soft drinks, meron pa tayong binabayadan na deposit dun sa bote. Yung binayad natin na additional payment na binayad natin sa bote, yun yung nagsisilbing security deposit na kapag hindi mo binalik yung bote, di kanila na yung binayad mong yun at kapag naman ibinalik mo, syempre ibabalik rin sa'yo yung security deposit na yun. Yung security deposit na yun rin yung ginagamit halimbawa dun sa nirerentahan mo, may nasira kang gamit, tapos hindi mo naman na napagawa, bale yung security deposit na yun yung magsisilbing payment mo dun sa nasira mo na hindi mo naman napagawa. Basta ang point dito is yung security deposit is ibabalik sa'yo, kaya hindi mo na siya kailangang isama sa right of use asset mo or hindi mo na siya kailangang isama sa asset mo. So yun yung dalawa. Ulitin ko, Yung dalawang hindi capitalizable at hindi mo na kailangang isama sa right of use asset ay yung leasehold improvements ng PPE at saka yung security deposit. So, sa puntong to, since natapos na tayong ipaliwanag kung ano ba yung initial measurement ng right of use asset, kung ano-ano yung cost na kasama doon, at saka napaliwanag din kung ano yung cost na or yung mga hindi capitalizable at hindi na dapat pang isama sa right of use asset. So, yun, pag-uusapan naman natin dito yung subsequent naman na subsequent measurement ng right of use asset. So, IFRS 16, paragraph 29 provides that a lessee shall measure the right of use asset applying the cost model. So, dito, ang susundin nating model is yung cost model kasi nga yun na yung sinabi ng IFRS. Ibig sabihin nito, initially, nire-record natin siya at cost. Diba yun nga, nakabanggit naman. So, nire-record siya at cost. And subsequently, nire-record na siya at a carrying amount. Ibig sabihin nito, yung cost less accumulated depreciation. Diba, parang diba kanina, nire-record natin siya yung, initially, nire-record natin siya at a cost model. So, dito nga, sa carrying amount naman na natin siya i-record. So, paano mangyayari yun? Sinabi nga na yung cost, ileles natin yung accumulated depreciation at saka less any accumulated impairment loss kung meron man. So, yun yung pag-record ng subsequent measurement. Ulit, sa subsequent measurement, di ba, initially, ni-record siya at cost. So, dito, record naman natin siya at a carrying amount. So, paano natin makukuha si carrying amount? So, cost, less accumulated depreciation, and less any accumulated impairment loss kung meron man. Moreover, yung carrying amount is adjusted for any reimbursement ng lease liability. So, yun lang. Yun yung sa subsequent measurement ng right of use asset. So, ulitin ko ulit para mas matandaan nyo. Subsequent measurement ng right of use asset ay, di ba, gamit is cost model. Tapos, initially cost model, di ba? So, pagdating dito is at a carrying amount. Paano nga ulit makuha si carrying amount? Cost less depreciation or yung accumulated depreciation at yung accumulated impairment loss kung meron man. So, yun yung measurement or yun yung subsequent measurement ng right of use asset. Pag-usapan naman natin yung measurement ng lease liability. So, kagaya ng measurement ng right of use asset, ang lease liability ay mina-measure din subsequently and initially. And sabi, the lease liability should be initially recognized and measured at the present value of the lease payments. So, ano-ano ba yung nagko-comprise sa lease payments? Ang una ay yung fixed payments less any lease incentives receivable. So, basically, ito yung mga kailangan mong bayaran as a lessee kay lessor in relation sa pag-lease na whatever happens, fixed talaga siya. And sinasabi din na mag-ileles din natin dito yung any lease incentive receivable. So, kagaya halimbawa yung kanina, na sinabi ko na parang sabi ni lessor, wag na daw bayadan yung first 3 months. So, yung sinabing yun or yung incentive na binigay ni lessor na yun, ileles natin dun sa fixed payments na ibabayad natin sa kanya. Ang next one is the variable lease payments that depend on an index rate. Dito, variable siya because it varies dahil nga may changes. For example is yung tenant sa mall. So, bukod dun sa binabayaran sa space, yung binabayaran sa space na yun, yun yung nagsisilbing fixed payments. Tapos, meron pa ring makukuha dun sa sales na 5% rate. Halimbawa lang yun sa restaurant. Sa restaurant sa mall, 'di ba may binabayadan silang doon. Binabayaran nila yung space na nire-rent nila doon. Tapos bukod doon, yung lessor or yung nagpaparent ay may makukuha pa ding 5% na magbe-base doon sa sale. Sinabi siyang variable kasi 'di ba ang sale naman is nagbabago-bago, hindi naman siya palaging ganon. Kaya yung 5% na yun is mababago din talaga. Halimbawa sa taong to is 1 million yung sales mo. Tapos next year, naging 1.5, edi yung babayadan mong 5% na yun is mababago din. And same lang din ito dun sa index market. Mababago pa rin siya since nababago din sa market due to supply and demand. And yung pangatlo ay yung sa price of a purchase option. Dito naman, dapat si lessee is reasonably certain to exercise the option. Ano ba yung option na yun? Yung option is to purchase the underlying asset. Kumbaga parang magiging rent-to-own to. Tapos magkakaroon ng transfer of ownership from lessor to lessee. And kapag hindi naman certain, dito papasok yung sa kasunod, yung pang number 4. So yeah, ito yung number 4 na kasama dun sa initial measurement ng lease liability. Ito yung amount expected to be payable by the lessee under a residual value guarantee. So first, paliwanag muna natin kung ano ba tong si residual value. So sinasabi na ang residual value daw is the amount or value at the end of the useful life na mare-recover pa. Kumbaga, after mong gamitin si asset for 10 years, may value pa siya sa market kung ibebenta. So dito, 'di ba, ito yung ina-expect na babayaran ni lessee kay lessor. Tapos dito, 'di ba, nagkaroon ng word na guarantee. Si guarantee, ito yung siya yung third person na parang magsasabi o magsusupport na yun yung residual value ng asset na yun after ng useful life. Tapos additional information na tatandaan natin dito na kapag nakakita tayo ng RVG or yung residual value guarantee, ibig sabihin walang transfer of ownership doon. And tapos, 'di ba, sabi nga expected to be payable daw. Yung payable na yun na sinasabi is not a payment talaga, but it is the value equal to guaranteed. Kumbaga, kasi nga 'di ba wala namang transfer of ownership dito. Kumbaga ibabalik mo lang yung underlying asset na yun kay lessor na may value pa once na ibebenta na ni lessor sa market. Tapos ito, paano naman if yung fair value nung inuupahan mo is mababa kaysa sa residual value nung asset? Bale, dito pa lang papasok yung actual payment kung saan magde-debit ka ng lost on finance list tapos credit ka ng cash kasi nga binayaran mo. Halimbawa, sa merkado, ang bentahan na lang nung underlying asset na yun is 100,000. Kaso, ang residual value talaga nung underlying asset na yun is 200,000. Di ba mas malaki, ang nangyari is mas malaki pa din yung residual value kaysa dun sa fair value nung underlying asset na yun. Kaya magkakaroon ka ng short, 'di ba, na 100,000 kasi nga 200,000 less 100,000 na fair value. So magkakaroon ka ng short na 100,000 kaya kailangan mong bayaran yun. So yun yung kasama doon sa sinasabi doon sa number 4. Ayun yung actual payment. So ayun yung expected na babayadan mo. Pero kapag naman kabaliktaran, halimbawa ay mas mataas na si residual value kaysa mas mataas na si market value kaysa mas mataas na si fair value kaysa sa kay residual value, wala siyang entry since wala namang settlement ng cash and kailangan mo lang talagang ibalik yung underlying asset na yun kay lessor. So yung number 5 ay yung payment of penalties for terminating the lease if the lease term reflects the lease exercising an option to terminate the lease. So dito ito lang naman yung mga penalties na babayaran mo kapag may termination option or kapag ita-terminate mo na yung pag-lease mo dun kay lessor. So may mga penalties kang babayaran at yun dito yun papasok. So yun, ito yung 5 na kasama sa lease payments na kailangan i-record initially. So, this is the end of my report. I hope na may natutunan kayo kahit konti lang. So, yun. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. I am Rowelyn P. Pasha. In this moment, I will be discussing the subsequent measurement of the lease liability as well as the accounting for the finance lease book of the lessor. After na ma-discuss ng aking kagroup ang initial measurement of the lease liability, puntahan naman natin ang subsequent measurement nito. Ano-ano nga ba mga kailangan nating i-consider when determining the subsequent measurement? And under subsequent measurement of the lease liability, we have accruing interest on the lease liability, lease payments made, and remeasurements reflecting any reassessment or lease modifications. After the initial recognition, the measurement of a lease liability is affected by, first, accruing interest on the lease liability. Lease liabilities are measured on an amortized cost basis using an effective interest method, similarly to other financial liabilities. Ibig sabihin, ang accruing interest on the lease liability ay ating i-measure base sa amortized cost gamit ang effective interest method. Para sa ating reference kung ano ang formula ng effective interest method, we have effective interest rate is equal to the quantity of 1 plus I divided by n raised to n minus 1. Where R is the effective interest rate, I is the stated interest rate, n is the number of compounding periods per year. Moreover, ang amortized cost ay makukuha naman natin through cost of the asset at the beginning minus principal payment na kung saan ang principal payment is computed through annual lease payment minus interest expense. At ang interest expense naman ay ating mako-compute through cost of the asset at the beginning multiplied by the rate na ginamit sa pagkuha ng present value factor. Interest is recognized in PRL unless it can be capitalized under IAS 23. Let us remember na ang interest na mai-incur ng lessee will be recognized sa profit or loss. Pero kung capitalizable naman ito, magbabase tayo sa IAS 23. The second one is the lease payments made. Lease payments reduce the carrying amount of the lease liability. Dito mahalagang tandaan natin na if the lessee pays his lease, magkakaroon ng pagbaba sa carrying amount of a particular lease liability. The reason is of course the payment made by the lessee. Variable lease payments are not included in the measurement of the lease liability are recognized in PRL in the period in which the event or condition that triggers those payments occurs. Para maliwanagan tayo kung ano nga ba yung variable lease payments, ito ang kanyang definition. Variable lease payments are the payments that can change depending on something in the future, such as inflation rate, future sales, asset use, and many more. One example of this kind of lease payment is the variable lease payments depending on an index or a rate according to PFRS 16. At sinasabing ang mga variable payments na hindi kasama sa measurement of the lease liability ay ating i-recognize sa profit or loss sa oras kung kailan naganap yung event na nagtulak sa lessee para magkaroon siya ng variable lease payments. Lastly, remeasurements reflecting any reassessment or lease modifications. Remeasurements of the lease liability are treated as adjustments to the right-of-use asset. If the carrying amount is reduced to zero, any further reduction is recognized immediately in P or L. The lease liability is remeasured when: letter A, there is a change in the assessment of a lease term, or letter B, there is a change in the assessment of an option to purchase the underlying asset, or letter C, there is a change in the amounts expected to be payable under residual value guarantee, or letter D, there is a change in future lease payments resulting from a change in an index or a rate used to determine those payments. Here are the points we must remember. The remeasurements made under letters A and B should be made using a revised discount rate. The remeasurements made under letters C and D should be made using an unchanged discount rate. However, remeasurements made under letter D should be made using a revised discount rate if they are caused by a change in floating interest rates. IFRS 16 states that Lease liabilities shall be recalculated if there is a change in an index or rate used to calculate the lease's payments. If the recalculation arises because floating interest rate have changed, the lessee should use a revised discount rate based on the new interest rates. Matapos nating madiscuss ang subsequent measurement of the lease liability, punta naman tayo sa accounting for the finance lease, book of the lessor. As discussed earlier, in a finance lease, there is a transfer of ownership or substantial transfer of risks and rewards incidental to ownership of an asset, but remember that the title may or may not eventually be transferred. Under finance lease, we have two classifications of arrangement, the direct financing lease and the sales type lease. Pagtuunan muna natin ng pansin ang unang classification, which is the direct financing lease. Direct financing lease does not involve a manufacturer's or dealer's profit. According to the definition, it does not involve a manufacturer's or dealer's profit. Bakit? Kasi when we talk about direct financing lease, the entity here is not a dealer or a manufacturer. Instead, the entity is engaged in financing business. Tandaan po natin ang phrase na financing business para po madali nating maalala ang direct financing lease. Kalimitang ini-offer ang direct financing lease ng mga financing institutions wherein tutulungan ng financing entity ang kanyang customer to buy, for example, a certain property. Then apparently, once na ma-acquire na ng financing entity yung property, papaupahan naman niya ito sa kanyang customer. Moreover, walang manufacturers or dealers profit sa direct financing lease because the fair value and the cost of the asset are equal. Therefore, magre-recognize tayo ng income in this arrangement mula sa interest income arising from the lease at ang transaction ay mangyayari sa pagitan ng financing entity which is considered as the lessor and its potential lessee. For example, ABC Company acquires a particular building and leases it to CDA Corporation for 4 years with the intent of generating revenue from the resulting interest payments. Sa example natin, ang ABC Company ang nagsiserve as the lessor kasi siya ang nag-lease or nagpaupa ng building. Samantalang ang CDA Corporation naman ang nagsiserve as lessee kasi siya ang uupa ng building ni ABC Company. Dito magkakaroon ng income sa ABC Company through the interest na ibabayad ni CDA Corporation sa loob ng agreed lease term nila na 4 years. Initial direct cost is included in the initial measurement of the net lease receivable or net investment. If there is initial direct cost, a new implicit rate will be computed using interpolation. I-define muna natin ang initial direct cost. When we say initial direct cost, these are the incremental cost, incremental means addition, of obtaining a lease that would not have been incurred if the lease had not been obtained. Ibig sabihin, kailangan may particular lease na mag-occur para ma-incur natin ang initial direct cost. Moreover, ang initial direct cost sa direct financing lease is capitalized as part of net lease receivable. Tandaan, sa net lease receivable because net investment is the initial measurement of lease receivable. And also, itong initial direct cost ay ma-amortize din over the lease term. And of course, this treatment of recognizing initial direct cost ay hindi applicable sa mga manufacturer or dealer lessors since we are talking about direct financing lease. Now, let us define some accounting considerations related to direct financing lease. As stated in PFRS 16, the lessor shall recognize finance income over the lease term based on the pattern reflecting a constant periodic rate of return on the lessor's net investment in the lease. Here, ang finance income na tinutukoy ay ang interest income. As I have said a while ago, ang source of income for a direct financing lease ay ang interest income coming from the lease. We have 3 accounting considerations related to direct financing lease, namely, gross investment, net investment, and the manufacturer's or dealer's profit. Ang unang accounting consideration for direct financing lease is the gross investment. Para mas madali nating maunawaan, ang gross investment is computed as follows. Gross investment is equal to gross rental plus absolute amount of residual value. Atin munang himayin ang mga terms na involved sa formula. The first one is the gross rentals, which refers to the rental payments over the lease term. Kumbaga, ito ay tumutukoy sa amount na ini-expect na matatanggap ng isang lessor sa kanyang lessee. The second one is the absolute amount of residual value, whether guaranteed or unguaranteed, na kung saan ay tumutukoy sa magiging amount na ini-expect ng lessor for his underlying lease property at the end of the lease term. I-differentiate naman natin ang dalawa. Ang guaranteed residual value ay tumutukoy sa value of underlying lease property na somehow ay sure ang lessor na ang amount na ito ay marirealize at the end of the lease term, and it is determined by the parties not related to the lessor or the third parties. On the other hand, unguaranteed residual value ay tumutukoy naman sa amount in which the realization of it by the lessor is not assured or hindi sigurado, and it is guaranteed solely by a party related to the lessor. Again, gross investment is equal to gross rentals plus absolute amount of residual value. Magtungo naman tayo sa tinatawag na net investment. In the lease, net investment is equal to the cost of asset plus initial direct cost. Himayin muli natin ang formula. Ang cost of the asset ay tumutukoy sa original value of the asset or the value of the property na pinapaupahan. Initial direct cost ay tumutukoy naman sa lahat ng nagastos ng lessor initially para ma-execute ang lease contract. Ang huli naman ay ang manufacturer's or dealer's profit. Though we will discuss manufacturer's or dealer's profit, we should remember that direct financing lease does not involve it because the entity is engaged in a financing business. Moving on, the formula for manufacturer's or dealer's profit is present value of the minimum lease minus cost of the leased asset. Elaborate ulit natin ang formula. Present value of the minimum lease payments refers simply to the sum of all of the lease payments that are to be made in the future. On the other hand, cost of the leased asset, ito naman yung mga costs na kaakibat ng asset na pinapaupahan ng lessor to its lessee. Para mas maunawaan natin ang mga accounting considerations na ating na-discuss, let us try to answer this illustrative problem. On January 1, 2022, Pepper Company leased a machinery to Ivana Company with the following details. Cost of machinery, 3,760,100. Residual value guarantee, 400,000. Useful life and lease term, 4 years. Implicit interest rate, 10%. Present value of 1 at 10% for 4 periods, 0.6830. Present value of an annuity of 1 at 10% for 4 periods, 3.1699. Present value of an annuity due of 1 at 10% for 4 periods, 3.4869. The annual rental is payable in advance on January 1 each year, starting January 1, 2022. Required. Number 1, how much is the annual rental? Number 2, how much is the gross investment? Number 3, how much is the net investment? Bago tayo magsimula, take note that since ang annual rental is payable in advance, ang gagamitin natin ay ang present value of an annuity due, which is 3.4869. Kasi yung ordinary present value of annuity na 3.1699 ay saka lamang natin gagamitin kapag ang first payment ay after 1 period. Magpatuloy na tayo sa ating problem. Para makuha natin ang gross investment, we need to find first the annual rental, which will be computed through cost of the asset, which is 3,760,100. Ilalas natin dito ang present value of residual value, which is 273,200, na nakuha natin by multiplying 400,000 and 0.6830. 3,760,100 minus 273,200 is equal to 3,486,900 divided by present value factor, which is the present value of annuity due of 1 at 10% for 4 periods, with a value of 3.4869, we came up to the annual rentals of 1 million pesos. Therefore, our answer for the requirement number 1 is 1 million pesos. Requirement number 2. Once na makompute natin ang annual rental, tungo naman tayo sa gross investment. Gross rentals with the value of 4 million, nakuha natin by multiplying the annual rentals na 1 million sa lease term na 4 years, then add naman natin ngayon ang residual value na 400,000, we arrive to the amount of gross investment of 4,400,000. Therefore, our answer for requirement number 2 is 4,400,000 pesos. Down to our last requirement, our formula is net investment is equal to the cost of asset plus initial direct cost. Pero since wala namang given sa problem natin na initial direct cost, our net investment would be equal to our cost of asset, which is 3,760,100 pesos. Therefore, our answer for requirement number 3 is 3,760,100 pesos. After we discuss the direct financing lease, let's now move on to the sales type lease. Sales type lease involves the recognition of a manufacturer's or dealer's profit or loss on the transfer of the asset to the lessee. In this classification, the lessor is a dealer or a manufacturer. From the phrase sales type, meaning nagbebenta yung entity, it uses the lease in facilitating sale. The transaction here is between the dealer or a manufacturer, which is the lessor, and to its potential lessee. Nagkakaroon ito ng malaking pagkakaiba sa direct financing lease in terms of recognizing income. As I have discussed earlier, kapag magre-recognize tayo ng income in terms of direct financing lease, ang re-recognize natin ay manggagaling sa interest income. Pero dito sa sales type lease, since in this arrangement, si lessor ay dealer or manufacturer, dalawa ang source of income nito. Ang una ay ang income na manggagaling din sa interest income kasi maaaring installment basis ang pagbabayad ng customer or ng lessee kay lessor. At ang pangalawa naman ay ang tinatawag nating manufacturers or dealers profit or loss. Katulad ng na-discuss ko kanina, para makompute natin ng manufacturers or dealers profit or loss, we need to get the difference between the present value of the minimum lease payments and the cost of the leased asset. Initial direct cost is expensed immediately or added to the cost of sales account. Kung sa direct financing lease, ang initial direct costs ay included sa net lease receivable, dito naman sa sales type lease, ang recognition ng initial direct cost ay i-include natin sa cost of goods sold account. Now, let us define some accounting considerations related to sales type lease. We have gross investment, net investment, unearned interest income, sales, cost of goods sold, and gross profit. Ang una ay ang gross investment. Since na-discuss na natin kanina kung paano makakompute ang gross investment, ito ay parang sort of review na lang. Gross investment is equal to the gross rentals for the entire lease term plus the absolute amount of the residual value, whether guaranteed or unguaranteed. Punta naman tayo sa net investment. Ang computation ng net investment sa direct financing lease at sales type lease ay magkaiba. Kung sa direct financing lease, net investment is equal to the cost of the asset plus initial direct cost. Dito naman sa sales type lease, we just need to add the present value of the gross rentals and the present value of the residual value. Mamaya ay meron tayong sample problem upang mas maunawaan natin itong formula. Ang sunod naman ay ang unearned interest income. Once na ma-determine natin ang amount ng gross investment at ng net investment, kailangan lang nating isubtract ang gross investment at ang net investment upang makuha natin ang amount ng unearned interest income. Sales is the amount to the net investment in the lease or fair value of the asset, whichever is lower. Dahil ito ay sales type lease, dito ay magkakaroon ng bentahan. And as a result, magkakaroon din tayo ng sales. Ang sales naman dito ay maaaring ibase sa net investment in the lease or fair value of the asset. Basta i-determine natin kung alin ang mas mababang amount. Kumbaga, kung mas mababa ang net investment as a fair value, ang net investment ang magiging sales. At kung mas mababa naman ang fair value sa net investment, ang fair value ang ating magiging sales. Fair value of the asset, alam nyo na kung ano ang meaning nito, pero sasabihin ko pa rin para ma-review na rin tayo. Fair value of the asset is the amount paid in the transaction between participants if it's sold in the open market. A willing buyer and seller have agreed upon this value. Sunod naman ay ang cost of goods sold. Dito sa sales type lease, ang cost of goods sold natin ay makukuha kapag pinag-add natin ang cost ng asset na ibinenta at yung initial direct cost. Based sa discuss ko kanina, dito natin mapapansin na ang initial direct cost when it comes to sales type lease ay component or included talaga sa cost of goods sold. Again, cost of goods sold is equal to the cost of the asset sold plus initial direct cost. Lastly is the gross profit. Kung ating mapapansin, in terms of gross profit, ang formula nito ay yung usual formula na alam natin at ginagamit natin, which is sales minus cost of goods sold. Mamaya, meron muli tayong sample problem upang mas maunawaan natin ang mga formulang ito. Let us try to answer this illustrative problem. Pepper Company is a dealer in machinery. On January 1, 2022, a machinery was leased to Ivana Company with the following provisions. Annual rental payable at the end of each year, 800,000. Lease term, 5 years. Useful life of machinery, 5 years. Cost of machinery, 2 million. Estimated residual value, 200,000. Initial direct cost paid by lessor, 100,000. Implicit interest rate, 10%. Present value of annuity of 1 for 5 years at 10%, 3.7908. Present value of 1 for 5 periods at 10% for 0.6209. At the end of each lease term, on December 31, 2026, the machinery will revert to Pepper Company. Required. Number 1, how much is the gross investment? Number 2, how much is the net investment? Number 3, how much is the unearned interest income? Number 4, how much is the sales? Number 5, how much is the cost of goods sold? And number 6, how much is the gross profit? Requirement number 1, we need to find the gross investment. The formula would be gross rentals plus residual value. In the problem, makukuha natin ang gross rentals by multiplying the annual rental na 800,000 sa lease term na 5 years. Meron tayo ngayong 4 million as our gross rentals. Tapos, i-add naman natin yung residual value na 200,000, we came up to the gross investment na 4,200,000 pesos. Requirement number 2, we need to find the net investment. We just need to add the present value of gross rentals and the present value of residual value. Present value of gross rentals is 800,000 times the present value factor of ordinary annuity, which is 3.7908. Bakit itong ating ginamit? Kasi indicated na payable each year ang ating annual rental payable. The answer is 3,032,640. Then add naman natin ang present value of residual value, which is 200,000 times 0.6209. The answer is 124,180. 3,032,640 plus 124,180 is equal to 3,156,820 pesos. Therefore, our net investment is equal to 3,156,820 pesos. Requirement number 3 is the unearned interest income. Kailangan lang nating isubtract ang gross investment natin na 4,200,000 at ang ating net investment na 3,156,820. At ang sagot natin ay 1,043,180. Therefore, ang ating answer sa requirement number 3 is 1,043,180 pesos. Let us now go to requirement number 4. According sa discussion natin kanina, ang sales ay equal sa fair value or net investment whichever is lower. Since wala namang given sa problem natin na fair value, our sales will be our net investment which is 3,156,820 pesos. In requirement number 5, atin lamang pong ipag-a-add ang cost of the asset sold na may value na 2 million at ang ating initial direct cost na 100,000. Kaya ang ating cost of goods sold ay 2,100,000 pesos. Para naman sa ating last requirement, gagamitin lamang natin ang usual formula na ating ginagamit sa pagkuha ng gross profit, which is sales minus cost of goods sold. Bale, 3,156,820 minus 2,100,000 is equal to 1,056,820. Therefore, ang ating gross profit ay 1,056,820 pesos. So, natapos na ang aking discussion. I hope may natutunan kayo mula sa akin. Maraming salamat sa pakikinig.